Good morning. Hope you're having a good day. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. Sean Fitz with me. Blue White Illustrated Nate Bauer is going to join us in just 1 second. We're in the middle of May, Fitz, which, I mean, there's always news. There's always something going on. But really the biggest Penn State news is David Taylor, new head coach for Oklahoma State Wrestling. So your thoughts on David Taylor to start the show?
Yes.
Or just how you doing?
He is the new head coach at Oklahoma State Wrestling. That's hey, look at me. I'm not a wrestling guy. I can make you pro wrestling references if you want. But I'm sure Greg Pickle has much, much better insight than that on David Taylor. That hurts. I know he's opening more businesses in State College, so I'm a little surprised to hear he's heading to Stillwater. But hey, man, that's a big change, I guess.
Yeah. We'll be talking about that, of course, on the wrestling show when we get to that either this week or next week. But really, the things going on in Penn State football, setting up for May, setting up for the fall. And that's what's on tap for today. Penn State's transfer portal exodus. A week ago, Fitz sat here and said, I would really feel more comfortable if it were Thursday before I say there's any definitive things happening in the transfer portal. And as he predicted, something happened in the transfer portal on Thursday. We're talking about that today as well, including 3 players you don't think we're talking about enough. Our experts are going to be giving you guys that are under the radar or not being discussed as much as maybe some of those hot button topics. All that coming up later on the show, including the BWI Mailbag, which is your opportunity to ask our experts questions here on the show, or BlueWhiteIllustrated.com on the Blue White Illustrated message bag, and we'll get to those questions. But Fitz, let's start off with your recruiting recap of the last weekend since our recruiting conversation last Thursday. What's going on with Penn State recruiting here in the middle of May?
Big weekend for Lyric Samuel, the Penn State wide receiver commit, won the MVP at the Under Armour UC Report Stop in Jersey. It was not a pleasant event in terms of weather, but Samuel made the most of it. Obviously, not great with receivers and weather and all that kind of stuff. But that's good to see, because this is a guy that Penn State is all over the recruiting services are all over the map with. We have him as a 4-star, and I know this is all fresh in my mind because I just am putting up a deep dive on Lyric Samuel on the site of Blue White Illustrated. Check that out. But we have him in the top 200. Others have him as a low 3-star, so he's all over the map. So getting out and getting seen in front of a lot of these guys that do the ratings and things like that it's very important this time of year if you're into that sort of thing. So I think he had a big weekend. I'm very high on him, as you know, if you followed us at all. 6'3.5", runs a 4.5 and change, which again, we've conditioned ourselves to believe that 4.5 is not that fast. But when you're first off, it is. Yeah. Number 2, when you're 6'3.5", 180, that's moving there. So yeah, excited to see his development. He is a raw piece of clay. He's a young raw piece of clay. Doesn't turn 17 until September, which is a very interesting point of reference, because he's going to turn into the Allen Robinson. Hey, he's young for his class type thing, which was a thing. Oh man, a decade ago. Yeah. So good. We get to do that again. But no, Lyric Samuel, big weekend. In terms of Penn State, they're still on the road. There are targets that, are waiting for their official visits. I had a most wanted go up over the weekend on defense to complement that. And that's my apologies. I know if you listen to the show on Thursday, which was a pre-recorded show, we said that was going up, but then Thursday got crazy and all of a sudden it got bumped to the weekend. So hopefully you check that out. There's a lot of information on there, a lot of stuff to prep you for May and June.
I know Andrew Olesh is top of the mind for a lot of Penn State football fans and recruiting fans wanting to get one of these Pennsylvania players. We've talked a lot about him on the recruiting show. So what's the latest news, or what's the latest conversation around one of Penn State's top in-state targets left?
Ryan just wrote about him this morning on BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Got a couple of official visits, which has been the schedule for a while. I think Alabama and Michigan are the 2 that are pushing Penn State the most. I still think Penn State's in the driver's seat here, but it's gotten interesting because, as we talked about last week, Matt Henderson is all of a sudden a target. Brody Lennon from Ohio. So Penn State probably moving toward taking a couple of tight ends, but Olesh is to me the one that makes the most sense. I know Lincoln Cure is very highly regarded nationally, but Olesh is a guy that's he's gone gangbusters on this recruiting scene over the last couple of months. And I'm happy to see it, because I thought that might happen. Even last summer when we saw him at camp, thought that might be a guy that rose up. Did I see Alabama, Michigan level? Nah, not necessarily, but we didn't see that with Luke Reynolds either. And he ended up in the top 50 of the On3 industry rankings as well. So that's what you have, that sort of meteoric rise. And in Northeast tight end, that is something that we've seen over the last couple of cycles, and it's good for Andrew. He'll be back on campus at Penn State, not only for that official visit, but before then as well. We talked about that on the site of BlueIllustrated.com, so check that out. But it's been a meteoric rise for him, and I think it's been awesome to watch.
If you want to get more of that recruiting information, you want to get some of the stuff we've been talking about, Nate has been doing a lot of work on the wide receivers, kind of assessing, and we'll get into a little bit here in our transfer portal discussion. But if you want the full breakdown, including, I just put out an updated projected depth chart after all of the decisions that were made in the last week, sign up right now. We love you here on the Blue White Illustrated podcast and YouTube show. 2 months for $1. That's code PSU1. When you sign up, you get 2 months for $1, so you get to try it out for an extended period of time. If you get addicted to it, like most people do when you get into the message board and the premium articles and access to all of our thoughts and content, then you can join us there and you can stay with us for the rest of eternity. Let's get into our transfer portal conversation and bring in Nate Bauer, senior editor for Blue White Illustrated, to join the show. We talked about this on Thursday. Nate and I broke everything down as far as the players, the immediate reaction, the immediate impact of these things. But it's been, 5 days. We've had a weekend to think about it. So, Nate, welcome to the show. What are your second thoughts after your initial thoughts on the transfer portal exodus of 5 players, including King Mack and Malik McClain from the Penn State roster?
Yeah. Hello. What are my second thoughts? I think, listen, I'm not a pearl clutching guy. You know this. But
All right. It sounded like that was going somewhere.
I mean, I think he's frozen, and we're seeing him frozen, but you never know with Nate because he's got those dramatic pauses in there. So this is not a dramatic pause that we can see. So we'll just go. We'll get back out there.
All right. Yeah, we'll get to that. Fitz, you haven't had a chance to talk about this.
I haven't.
Yeah. What are your thoughts with what's been going on with Penn State in the transfer portal?
Imagine my surprise when Thursday morning, after we did that show, by the way, in which I said, I'm not fully comfortable here because there were a couple of guys that we thought could get to. There was actually 2 guys that I was watching last week that I thought that we could get to the line, and they could go one way or the other. Unfortunately, one was King Mack, and that went the other way. The other guy got across the line, but several others did not. But no, Mack is the one that stings the most to me. I mean, this is a guy, the 4th safety. When you're playing 3 safeties, you need a guy. A stinger happens, something happens, and all of a sudden you don't know how that's going to work out. Mack was a guy that was going to play some this year and then eventually be a starter in 2025. So you look at that, and you look at how well Penn State's been able to retain, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to get those guys to build that depth, to cultivate that depth at all 3 levels, and then all of a sudden Mack's out the door, and that one hurts. That one hurts to me. It also hurts because you look at South Florida, and this is kind of the reality of South Florida. We talked all those years about Florida recruiting and how different Florida recruiting was, and how you were never sure until they were signed. You're never sure until you've got, until they're on the field now. Like, that's kind of the reality that comes with this. It's just a different type of recruitment, different type of player, person, all that kind of stuff that goes into it. So it's tough from that angle as well. So if you're Penn State and you've got the best Florida recruiter in the country on your staff in J1 Sider, like how do you balance the risk versus reward of going into South Florida and making that happen? And I know they've got Florida guys on the roster. They've been extremely successful with Zane Durant. Elliot Washington's from another part of Florida, but how do you go into the South Florida market and be confident that the guys that even you get and you
good
sign,
players too, right?
Good
players that can help you.
King Mack, I think, is going to be a good player. Conrad Hussey was a really good player as well, like his teammate. So how do you do all that kind of, or how do you adjust for that when you go to recruit South Florida in the next cycle? I don't know. It's tough because they've got some guys, and your quarterback is currently committed to Miami Central. Your running back is currently committed to Miami Central. Randy Aderica, the defensive tackle, is a guy that Penn State's very high on, and he's very high on Penn State. So you've got to all factor this when you're talking about approach, and it's tough. And again, when you've got the best South Florida recruiter in the country on your staff, and South Florida recruiting is the wild, wild west as it gets in recruiting, that's a tough balance to make.
Yeah, I'm just super interested in your opinion. First off, welcome back to the show, Curtis Jacobs. He says Andrew Rappleyea is an All-American in the making, stamping this now. Appreciate you being here, Curtis. We're going to be talking about underrated players later in the show, so if you want to stick around and have that conversation with us, we're always happy to have you. Also, you're invited on the show anytime you want. Just hit me up. The question I have for you, Fitz, about King Mac from a football perspective. This is kind of my thought about, and I'll get into this on tomorrow's show. I have a whole rant about this. It doesn't make a lot of football sense for King Mac to transfer given his position and the conversation about the young safeties on Penn State's roster. They're learning a new defense this year. So how far along are they in their progression and how much they need to know to be good at playing football? So King Mac transferring in May, wanting to find a place to play now. Does this make sense to you from a football perspective? And does that matter?
From a football perspective, not really. You know, the opportunity is here. Stick it out. Like, that's the problem. Like, if you're not starting in year 2, are you going to look elsewhere? That's an issue. Like, that's something that you have to deal with. But from a football perspective, no, it doesn't make a ton of sense, man. You're looking at a 4th safety, which, you know, Penn State has traditionally played 4 safeties. Now this defense is a 3 safety look. Does that hurt or does that help? I don't know. It's a weird cross section of my brain here that says, hey, you're one play away from being a regular starter, but at the other side of it is like you're behind those 3 guys that they seem to trust very much. And you know, you want Jalen Reed out there all you can. You want KJ Winston all you can. And we're probably not talking enough about Zakee Wheatley, which is something we'll talk about later, you know, when we talk enough about him. But it's tough to wrap your head around it because I think so much of this decision was probably outside of football. And that's the part that, you know, as you continue to adjust to this modern college football, that's the tough part. That's the tough part. How do you come in and grant he's from 1,000+ miles away or 1,000 miles away or whatever it is. So that comes into it. But at the same time, this is a tremendous opportunity to be a 4 safety. Like they can look to the portal and actually sell, hey, you might be the 4th guy, but you can actually play right now. So that's what's going to be interesting to me.
Nate, your thoughts, get back to you on this now that we got a strong connection, it seems. But we're talking about King Mac. We've addressed that part. You and I went back and forth on that last week. I just want to give you the opportunity to take this in whatever direction you want with kind of wrapping up our transfer portal conversation almost a week out since the news hit.
Yeah, I would just say that it hurts more in the immediate than I think it was initially given credit, right?
Yeah.
They are literally one injury, one anything away from really having some tough circumstances arise in terms of how important that room is to what Tom Allen wants to do defensively. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. And a bigger deal than I think, right? If I could go back and say, this I would last Thursday. Like I just think it's a much more acute,
especially for a guy that has ball skills like King Mac, Zakee Wheatley. These are 2 guys that you see on the roster where you watch them either at some point in their career or in high school that can make plays on the football in a defense that is about subterfuge and changing the picture and jumping routes and those skills in this defense. You know, I don't want to spoil my rant for tomorrow, but yeah, that's basically it. Is why would you transfer from a defense that features safeties where you're going to be part of the picture? But
yeah, that is today's current transfer portal era. And look, Penn State has gotten players, right? Chop Robinson. Maryland didn't want to lose him, right? Like there's at a young stage in his career, it turned out to be a 1st-round NFL draft pick. So it giveth and taketh away, right? That is kind of the reality of what the transfer portal is. I did want to touch on Malik McClain and just hammering home the notion again that the receivers are very interesting for Penn State next year, right? It already was the story, and I'm not saying that Malik McClain was destined to be a great receiver for Penn State this season, but you have one fewer option, right? There's one fewer chance, right? I almost look at it as you don't have to, if you have 5 players, right, at a bunch of different positions where you just need 2 to hit, right? That gives you the potential for failure to be okay. Now the margin of error for that failure has run out. They're down to, realistically, I mean,
yeah,
let's be honest.
They don't have a 2 deep of guys that have seen the field regularly, I think, Fitz. Got you muted there, Fitz.
Trying to publish this story in the back. Sorry. No, they don't have that. And it's tough to rationalize, because we talk so much about the offense, and we talk so much about how different it is than Penn State's defense. And, losing King Mack is losing the 4th safety, and all of a sudden that's a big piece. But like, there's so much ambiguity on the offensive side of the ball. You did your depth chart yesterday. Nate has done rebuilding the receiver room, roughly 8 times in the last month and a half or something like that. It's been a lot. So the ambiguity is what makes it hard. And you could make an argument for some of those guys to step in and make plays. You can make an argument for Malik McClain to have been a part of the rotation. It's just tough to fall back, because you don't have that evidence that they can do it on a consistent basis. So, there are guys that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show that maybe can be an answer. And I talked to, I kind of had this conversation on the board yesterday. Like, there's not one sole answer to this receiver room. Like, Julian Fleming can be an answer, but if you're looking for the answer, there's so much more that goes into it.
Nate, I know you've written a lot about this, and you've talked a lot about the receiver room. And do we want to dig into the Julian Fleming thing here quickly, or do we want to just move on to the next topic? Because it feels like one of those things where if we address it and we talk about it, we have to go all in. And I don't know that we have a ton of time for that. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I just think it's one of those things that I would rather be on the front end of than not, and just say to Penn State fan, right? The time for getting to know each other has happened, right? Penn State now knows Julian Fleming. Julian Fleming knows Penn State, and I think it will become important for Penn State fans to set expectations accordingly, right? To be able to understand who he is, what he does for the room, the way he's been talked about, right? And I don't want it to come across as slamming his potential or saying that he doesn't have a chance to impact the room. He does. I think that his maturity as a whole, if that was the only thing that he brought to the room, that would be a big deal. That is a big deal. But I think that if you really dig in and really look at what he was at Ohio State, and some of his numbers accordingly, right? You see the 25 receptions, 32 receptions, right? A couple hundred yards there. It's important to see who they came against. It's important to understand what the role was within the game.
Yep.
Even his starting status is important to understand. And I shouldn't even be so vague about this. He wasn't a big deal. Like, he wasn't a big deal for Ohio State. That's just the reality. And I think that if Penn State fans are expecting the 5-star reputationally Julian Fleming to come in and upend this Penn State room and just be immediately the top target, I think that they're going to be very, very disappointed. That's not what's going to happen. So now you have a better idea of who he is and what he delivers. I think that with Penn State's running backs at being as talented and as productive as they are, having blocking receivers, which is something that they did not have last year, becomes that much more important. That will be utilized. But if you're expecting 6 catches and 85 yards on a week out basis, like, absolutely not. That's not what he's going to deliver to this Penn State football team this year.
We've talked.
Is there a refusal to acknowledge Trey Wallace because we've seen, his body of work and his seemingly injury-prone body of work to say that, okay, he's been here and he hasn't done it, so the new thing must be the guy that does it? Like, is that what we're seeing here?
I think that when you look at the room as a whole, it is all truly universally only about potential. Nobody, you can't point to a single person in that room and say, oh, they've produced, they have done this, and it is proven. Part of the nature of college football is that happens all the time. Right? You consistently go into seasons having lost production on the back end, and guys test themselves and have to figure out what it is, right? What they can deliver. I think that there is reason to believe, based on prior demonstration in practice, that Trey Wallace can deliver that, right? James Franklin is not, like, he's pretty forthcoming. So 2 springs ago, when he's talking about Trey Wallace as having separated himself with Keandre Lambert-Smith as being a tier above, that's real. That's a real thing. It has come against good defensive backs that Penn State has, right? That is a data point that you can use and extrapolate and say, okay, this is something that you can expect to see in the game. He can't help that he got hurt and missed 3/4 of the season last year. That, right? It happens. Yeah. Bad luck. It's tough. But at the same time, you can project that into this year and say, okay, assuming that he can stay healthy, he will deliver on what he has delivered previously in practice. But you got to see. And again, the thing that James Franklin said after the blue-white game that I cannot stress enough is it only matters against 3 teams on the schedule. Right? Like, it only, these guys are all good enough. They are all talented enough, and they are all, even at this level, consistent enough to have success against Indiana, against Purdue. They can do that. Can you do it against Ohio State? Can you do it out 3,000 miles from home at Southern Cal, right? Like, these are the questions that Penn State's receivers have to answer this year. And the bottom line is 3 months away, 4 months away from the season, like we are right now, you're just not going to know. There is no amount of feedback, of observation, of anything that can say, hey, this is what's actually going to happen when the games come around.
I want to get into today's topic of 3 players we're not talking enough about, because one of the guys on your list, Nate, just continue the conversation, but in this bucket of why is Omari Evans at the top of your list of guys that we're not talking enough about? He
has to be good. He's so fast, and that changes what Penn State can do offensively, right? Even if this has been something that James Franklin talks about, and again, like, I'm just taking cues from things that he has said publicly in the past about having players, receivers specifically, that can stretch the field. Even if he doesn't catch the ball at the end of running a 4-3 40 yards down the field, if he can make opposing defensive coordinators, cornerbacks, safeties respect him, that is huge to everything else that Penn State wants to do. That is huge for Nick Singleton. That is huge for Katron Allen. It's huge for the tight ends. It's huge for the other receivers. That all has a trickle-down effect when you can have a blazer on the outside that's going to burn teams deep. If he can catch the ball at the end of that route, even better, right, for Penn State. Yeah. His problem is he has not been able to stay on the field. He has not been able to have that impact consistently. But guess what? It's time. This is it. This is it for him. This is the year that has to come to fruition for Penn State, for him, for Drew Allar, right? All of those things are kind of intertwining at once.
Fitz, I know you have a different receiver on your list who is not necessarily a burner, but isn't slow. just why is Liam Clifford on your list of guys we're not talking enough about?
Isn't that fascinating though? Like that Liam runs a mid 4.4 and he's for some reason labeled as the possession guy. Which he is, he is that I think,
or the Wes Welker type when he's 6'1".
That leans to his strengths. No, I mean, he's a good player. And that's the thing, like I keep going back to is you need to have a baseline here. Like you kind of know what Liam is. And I think you need that. Like that is the tough thing is I think you need that while tempting yourself with the Omari Evans over the top or tempting yourself with the giant play. Like you need somebody to make the little plays and the normal plays. And all of that went away at the end of last season. Like everything kind of went away at the end of last season. Right. So I think Liam can be an exciting guy that I flippin' hate this because we've got, and I said flippin' because like all the stereotypes come about, but like that's what he can be. Remember that throw down the field against Illinois last year? He can be a double move guy too. Like he can sneakily get down the field. Dang, I did it. He can get down the field. Like he can do a lot of things that help you out. Yeah. I think that's really what I keep coming back to is like give yourself a base and then get the extra on top of it. Maybe the extra comes with the other guys, but give yourself a base. And I think that Liam Clifford can be one of those guys.
The thing that I'm looking for in any of these players we're talking about, and I wrote about how Caden Saunders can unlock Liam Clifford and his ability to play a couple of different spots yesterday. But the main thing that this group has missed is, yes, Liam Clifford is fast. Yes, Omari Evans is ultra fast, but when a Big Ten defensive back grabs him at the line of scrimmage, what happens? And so we talk about Julian Fleming in the conversation we had earlier. To me, like the goal of bringing in Julian Fleming is a dude that just gets open. And they need to do roles in an offense are as important as skill sets and position. Like your best three receivers might not be the guys that start because you want to do specific things with specific guys. And for me, like you talk about this receiving group, the thing they have lacked the most is how do you separate when guys get their hands on you? And that whoever does that, I'll just, from my opinion here in this, whoever does that is the guy that's going to make a difference in this receiving core because we all kind of think Trey Wallace can be that guy. Nate, you're the next guy that we're not talking about on your list enough. Who is it?
I have Jameel Lyons, and look, I think that certainly it is demonstrated and evident what defensive ends can do for you, can do for a defense, what they can do for Tom Allen's defense, how that impacts what he wants to accomplish at Penn State. I think that rightfully all of the attention this spring has been on Abdul Carter's move to that position group, but I think Lyons has the potential to be extremely good. And that was evident last season when he was kind of a surprise. He was a surprise through the summer. It was like, oh, well, hey, this guy's actually ready. He's figuring out all of the other stuff that goes into being a college football player at this level. And when you can pair that talent that has already been demonstrated again in practice and occasionally in games, but more so in practice, when you compare that with doing all the other things right, I think that it bodes fairly well, for him. I think he's going to play a lot, honestly. I think he's going to play a lot, and I think he's going to be pretty productive for Penn State this season.
Fitz, he's a guy that of the three of us on this show, I don't think you have been talking a little. You've been talking about him much more than the rest of us. So I guess welcome to the party for the rest of us, Fitz.
Hey. Yeah, I looked at his list this morning. I'm like, what a jerk. He knows he's my guy. and I actually told you last week when you were doing your most upside guys, I was like, hey, here's some information, but I'm going to hoard the rest of it because I want it all for me. So yeah, Lyons is a freak. Yeah, he's something that can give this defense yet another threat off the edge, and it's really becoming a nice little assembly line for Penn State. And I think he's the next up. So yeah, I'm not going to get too far down that well because I talked about him a lot, but he's in terms of potential, man, he's got it.
So on the flip side, I've been a fan of Zakee Wheatley's game and his projection for a while. Obviously last year that didn't quite work out, but now we're not talking enough about him according to Fitz. So why is that?
Yeah, it's tough because I think we lean a lot on defense because, well, the defense is the good side here. But Wheatley, I think, can be sort of like Amani was several years ago. Like he can be a good player, but also benefit on the stout line more than anybody else here.
Yeah.
Like Amani, ended up being an NFL corner, but like if you ask their interior grading system, like where he wasn't at the top of the list, even though he was at the top of the list of the interception totals there. So I think Wheatley, you move around again, Jalen Reed, maybe the most important player on this defense. You move around KJ Winston, and all of a sudden things can open up for a guy that can go find the football. And we've seen him go find the football and, turn that football over. So I'm excited to see what he can do. You talk about the reports out of winter workouts that were, hey, something clicked here, like something really happened where, you hated to see his snap count go down last season, but number one, you understood why, but number two, like, how does he react to that? How does he respond to that? And it seems like he responded by putting the work in and instead of, cutting tail and running. So I think there's something to be said for that. I think that there's an opportunity here. The 3 safety thing is interesting to me because when you lose that 4th safety, and if you happen to lose one of those other safeties for a couple plays or a game or 2 or something like that, what happens? Do you go back to the corners? Like is the third, because this is the conversation we've had, is the 3rd safety or the 3rd linebacker going to be the guy that plays that position? Well, you got 6 corners that you think can play. Is the 3rd corner all of a sudden wedging his way into that conversation? How does that work with a guy like Cam Miller, with a physical guy like AJ Harris? So you've got options. So like the sting factor is high with King Mack leaving, but like you've got options from other positions to help that out. And I'm not necessarily saying that a corner is going to move over and play safety full time, but in that defense, find a guy in that they call it the line now, right? Find a guy in that role that can potentially play from that cornerback room.
Yeah, the nickel position, it feels like, is whoever can play it. So it's right now Jalen Reed, and then the guys whose names have come up have all been corners, essentially. And so that's kind of what we saw in the blue-white game. Colin Dinkins, the guy that kind of blurs that line of he's 192 pounds, listed as corner. I don't know. But a guy that is for sure a corner, Nate, the last guy on your list, Adavian Collins. Why aren't we talking enough about Adavian Collins?
Well, why are we not? Is because he wasn't a factor last year, right? And so you had a guy who was coming through the transfer portal who was a fairly, Fitz, you can jump in immediately and tell me what his recruiting rankings were and all of that stuff.
Right now?
Yeah, right now. Tell me.
Yeah, no, he was a 3-star at Mississippi State, and then there weren't many waves of him going into the portal, and kind of popped up late. And Penn State had some lines in the water there. Of course, this was after Storm Duck left, so it seemed like the best of what's around at that time. But you also had the body of work of Johnny Dixon, who came in a similar situation, which wasn't the highest guy out there in terms of recruiting rankings, but Penn State kind of knew him. Penn State kind of knew Adavian Collins. They kind of knew the physical profile, and they thought that's a guy that, if it doesn't work out, maybe play special teams. But all of a sudden, like, he came on this winter and was like, I don't want to say a different person, but like, he was one of those guys that really got the message, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and if you want to know, if you're listening on the podcast, I threw up Adavian Collins' high school rankings, a firm 3-star, 822 national in the On3 industry ranking, 85 overall, but a guy who, as we talked about, has come on so far in the spring. And I think that's a really interesting part of the cornerback conversation. Just kind of a side note to that of talking about Adavian Collins. And do we see more of a timeshare here, do you think, Fitz, with the way AJ Harris and Cam Miller and all these guys have performed, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of separation here. So do you think that we're going to see, kind of like in 2022, you had not co-starters, but a competition each week to see who would be the starter between Johnny Dixon and Kalen King? Do you see that as a possibility on the horizon for these guys?
I think so, because number one, you want to keep them engaged and keep them like on the roster, basically. I guess we can say that now. You've got 6 guys that you'll try to whittle down to 4, maybe 5. How that lion position comes into play here for a guy like Cam Miller, for maybe a guy like Zion Tracy, like that's going to factor into that. And then you go through camp and you kind of understand what's going on. And Terry says this so often, is the guys kind of understand where they stand. Like they rank them, and they have the players rank them and all that stuff. And it's great, but it's not often that they're very deviated from what the coaches think. So these guys understand what's going on. Now, the non-conference schedule and West Virginia is going to be a tough game, I think, but at the same time, it's not a tough game where you have corners that have to lock down a certain number one receiver or something like that. Like the passing game from West Virginia isn't the part that scares you. So I think you can rotate those guys, and you can get 5 corners in there and go through September and work out the kinks and figure out what you've got there and figure out where you can move guys around to play the nickel. Because that's the other thing here is you got to replace Daquan Hardy. That's a good football player that played a lot of football, and it's going to be tough to figure out who fits that role and who can go through there. So confident in the scheme, confident in the physical development and all that kind of stuff there. It's just a matter of experience. You know, people are going to keep going back to Cam Miller in the Peach Bowl. That's kind of a red herring here, because, you know, this is a guy that was in position against a terrific wide receiver, didn't make the plays at the end of the game, but he was in position, and there's honestly more value from an evaluation standpoint in being in the position than finishing off that play, because you think that finishing off that play will come with experience. So I think that, you know, that's probably why we're more bullish on Cam Miller than a lot of people, just based off of that sour taste left in the mouth from the Peach Bowl there. So I think that, you know, you feel pretty good about this, and it's something that you feel confident will work itself out, and it has the numbers to work itself out here. Like if there's a guy that decides that he doesn't, you know, he's not going to get over that hump, you can stomach a loss there at that position, because you've got a lot of talent. You got a couple good freshmen that I don't want to say you need to play, but they're from Florida as well. So that's a long way from home.
That's a roundabout putting a fine point on it, but I think you're right. I think that this, you know,
it's Jacksonville. It's different. It's different than Miami. Let's be honest here. So you get a little bit more leeway there, but still a long way from home.
So take us home though with your third player in your opinion that we're not talking enough about.
Katron Allen, and I know there was a question earlier here in the chat about his status. He went out mid-spring, bit of an injury, needs some stuff cleaned up, and he'll be fine. But at the same time, we talk about the receivers so much, and we kind of take for granted those running backs. Sorry, Nate, not outside of Nick Singleton. It's a situation where I think Penn State is going to run the ball and try and run the ball a lot. And this is a guy that can be, a key part of that. He's been a key part of that for 2 years. He brings you something a little bit different than Singleton.
Yep.
And if you're moving Singleton around, which we think is a possibility here, a guy that, you want to get into space as much as possible, that can open some things. You talked about Omari running, almost running decoy and opening things up for other people. Well, Nick kind of playing a decoy at times can open some things up for Katron Allen. And we've seen that this is a guy that can make the most of what he's got. Now he's got improvement to make in terms of the open field and making people miss and getting faster and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, I can't emphasize enough how much of a workhorse, we saw Quinshon Junkins at Ole Miss. If you can get that out of Katron Allen, you're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah. We mentioned the running backs. Nick Singleton's name has come up. Nate, I just wanted to give you a brief rebuttal to talk about the running backs and their importance to the offense.
There's no rebuttal. It's full on agreement. They are gonna absolutely decimate the tread on those tires for both of those guys. They are going to have the ball in their hands all the time. I fully expect that. Yeah, I don't know what else there is to add to that, right? Okay. Drew Allar and Tyler Warren, yes. Okay. Trey Wallace, yes. But the idea is to have as many opportunities to move the ball efficiently as you can, and those two represent that for Penn State football this season. That's that's it.
Let's get to the BWI mailbag. We'll have more of these conversations based on your questions right now. We had this conversation already, but I just want to quickly give Philip in the Valley a shout out for asking a really smart question here in the BWI Mailbag Thread. He says, with Mac to the portal, the safety position isn't as deep with the fifth DB on the field most of the time. Does him leaving change any deployment in the secondary? Fitz, if there are any issues, we think that the safety, it's not going to be a linebacker. I guess I'm going to augment the question. We're still going to see 5 defensive backs. It's not going to be a linebacker on the field given the depth issues at that position, correct?
That's my gut feeling. You throw in another corner because you have numbers and you have talent there. I think the gulf between the number 3 safety and the number 4 safety is going to force you to tinker around with this, and I think it goes corner.
Nate, I want to ask you. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think, and this is for sure more in your wheelhouse, T. Frank. But I almost see. I think my understanding is they will play. It's going to be a corner in obvious passing situations anyway. Right. So the notion is Jalen Reed is effectively a linebacker in a 4-3 base package. Right. Like, so base that's what that is, which is why it's almost like to me, when you say, okay, it's not going to be a linebacker, I think it's going to be Dom DeLuca, honestly. Like, I think that is the interchangeability there is Jalen Reed, Dom DeLuca, more so than it is worrying about, right? Like, the corners are going to be on the field all the time as the nickel. That's what that is.
I guess I would say that one of going back again to the point of having Jalen Reed specifically at that position and going to a coverage player is that the umbrella, which is safeties and corners, you can change that and you can do more diverse things if that nickel defender is a secondary player. Dom DeLuca played safety for sure, but he's playing linebacker at Penn State. Does he give you the athleticism to drop him into a deep third or a deep quarter? Now, I might be overemphasizing that. You might be right here in what Tom Allen wants to do at Penn State versus what he would want to do at Indiana when maybe he didn't have enough linebackers he wanted to have on the field. That's a fair conversation to have as well. But that would be my hesitancy to say, like, yes, it's going to be Dom DeLuca out there outside of, I think, early rundowns, obvious running situations, because the whole point of this, of Jalen Reed being out there, is he can play the run well enough, but he can also do things that change the picture dramatically and disguise coverage. Third down, they're going to go dime defense from what I've seen, which means Jalen Reed stays as a rover. Maybe he's a slot defender. Maybe he's a spy defender in the middle of the football field, and then they bring on another corner to play in coverage, and they take either a linebacker or a defensive lineman off the field. So those have been the coverage decisions I've seen on film. But we just don't know what they've been cooking up. We don't know the differences of what they want to do at Penn State as opposed to what we've seen previously. But it does make sense with the caveat of we're not also then competing personnel with the front 7, which the defensive line has a case that you have to have 4 of them on the field at all times, no matter what. So I think there's a little bit of TBD there, and that would be my hesitancy to say Dom DeLuca is the other guy, which is why, I was thinking A.J. Harris is more in line with what they want to do. Let's get to this question. This is from Big Brad 357. He says, what do you constitute as improvement for Drew Allar this year? Completion percentage, more purposeful downfield passes, throwing receivers open, more touchdowns, better, quicker decision making. On the plethora of things that a quarterback has to do, Fitz, what do you think constitutes improvement from Drew Allar?
What's really funny about college football is that he could have the exact same stats next year and be a different quarterback. Like that's the problem with the stats that he put up last year is they're a bit hollow in terms of like didn't show the entire story, and he could do that again while showing the entire story, and it should just be the same results. So that's the number one funny thing here. I don't think percentage is it, but the decision making, he mentions throwing receivers open, and that's probably a general general statement, but I think it locates the issues here in that, just a touch late, just a touch, just not getting the feet right. And you see that chain of events, and it's like pornography, when you see it, that's kind of the definition here. Like, if you can see the improvement, the visual improvement with footwork, going into the decision making, going into throwing the receivers open, I mean, that's a big difference. I mean, you see this from veteran quarterbacks that make that leap. And I think he has the physical potential to do so, but I think it's going to be still going to be a process. I don't think he's there yet.
I've been very vocally defending the idea that Allar can be that guy and that he shows on film the mental process. Aside from that, Nate, from kind of a different perspective, maybe not the X's and O's, maybe not what is your view of what improvement looks like for Drew Allar?
Everybody's going to hate me. I want to know how many first downs he runs for. And then I want to see his receivers make plays for him. Those are the two, right? Like, that's, to me, I hate conversations about quarterbacks in vacuums, because it never is and it never will be. His offensive coordinator has to help him. His receivers have to help him. His running backs, his offensive line, all of those things have to help him. He can be as good as those components are for him. And that, to me, that is the entire story of what he is. If you look at last year, again, Fitz, what was it? 22 touchdowns, 26 touchdowns, 2 interceptions.
2 interceptions, yeah.
Okay, right. He didn't throw a single interception against Ohio State and Michigan. Is that right?
Didn't matter.
Do you know what? Right? He also completed 48% of his passes in those 2 games.
Yep.
And some of those were his fault. Some of those were his receivers never being open. Some of those were his receivers being open and not catching the pass. Right? It is a complex picture of why those performances were what they were. But to me, if he doesn't get that support, cool that you didn't throw interceptions. That's and I'm not even saying this on as though it's something that he is proud of. I think that it's ball protection is important. All of those unsexy things are important to that position. But if you can't be productive and get more than, I mean, how often do we talk about quarterbacks throwing for yards? Right? It's like, oh man, he eclipsed 350 yards passing. How much of that is a receiver catching a ball 10 yards downfield and making a play to go for another 30?
Yeah.
That did not exist for Penn State football last season. And if it doesn't, they are doomed this year.
Which gets back to my point about they need to get away. They need to create separation. They need to get away from defenders in man coverage. That's how you create yak. One note on your comment there about Drew Allar. He was tied for 8th in America with 24 throwaways last year. So where, according to PFF, this was a decision to kill the play. So he makes the safe decision. Maybe a few less, maybe a little more of that athletic hubris. Here's something that I've been thinking about, and I've been preparing guys for this question because I'm thinking long and hard about it. What does Drew Allar need to show improvement? He needs to beat Ohio State and Michigan. Quarterback wins. Quarterback wins are the only thing that matter. So he needs to build a time machine because Michigan's not on the schedule. I don't care. Go beat Michigan. Beat him in cornhole. Go beat Ohio State. You have to beat Ohio State and Michigan. And while you're at it, go beat UCLA and Georgia. And while you're at it, go lose some of those recruiting battles for Penn State and get them some of those players that are committed to other programs. So quarterback wins. He has to win. He has to win on all fronts for Penn State.
Can I loop back to the running for first downs conversation though?
Sure.
I genuinely think that's extraordinarily important for him to do this year. And,
cover one and run, baby. If everyone's covered, break the pocket.
Dude, they gotta stay on the field. They didn't stay on the field last year so often. And if you all of the dynamics and the conversations about the defense, right, being on the field too much and those situations happening too frequently, you have to be able to prolong your drives and give yourself more opportunities for those big plays to happen, particularly with some of the guys that they have.
Fitz,
are you saying from a physical aspect or from a mentality aspect? Because I've got thoughts on mentality. That's like, Drew is a young player that is soaking everything in, and all of a sudden, like, he's kind of in a hole there because he's done so much of that. It's time to have that initiative. It's time to do that. So that's what my question is for you is the physical running, like the running across for, that's a big deal. But like Sean Clifford putting it on his shoulders and say, F this, I'm going to do this. Like that is a different mentality than I see from Drew Allar, or than I've seen from Drew Allar.
I mean, arguably the biggest play of Trace McSorley's career was running for a first down late in a game against Minnesota, right? Taking it on your shoulders, being willing to fail in order to succeed. I mean, God, let's sell an inspirational book here, guys. But being willing to fail in order to succeed is something that did not happen last year and has to happen from him this season.
Like that.
And the intuition to make the right decision in those moments where he wants to throw the ball and be a passer first, but sometimes your guys aren't open. So in the moment, don't hesitate. Don't double clutch. Just bleep it and get the first down.
Until we get the John Elway helicopter, and then everybody's like, oh.
JC Corrigan asks this, and of course, if you didn't check out Fitz on Andy Staples' show, go check that out. He says, Fitz, expanding on your Andy Staples appearance, what do you feel is the general mood and expectations of the fan base, and are they realistic?
No, they're a fan base. They're not supposed to be realistic. Let's be honest here. And that's fine. Like, but understand what you're watching, understand what you're up against if you're Penn State. The general mood here is the always what's next, not what's there. And I think that's probably the frustrating part when you cover this team 365 days a year, and we're seeing it on, in off-season content and message boards and all that stuff. It's like, it's never like, there's never going to be enough. Even like, it's one of those things where I saw a couple of years ago when Georgia won a national championship, it's like, well, what's next? Like, what's going to happen now that you've got it? The
now
South
you're going
Park
to be the
change.
dominant school of the decade.
Yeah. Why aren't we a dynasty yet? Like that.
Yeah.
It's never enough for a fan base. And I get why. It's just that's what I see from a daily basis from this fan base in particularly. I said it, in case you missed on the Andy Staples, I likened it to Clark Griswold at the Grand Canyon, where you get there, you put your arm around Ellen, you see everything. It's majestic. It's beautiful. Okay, we got to get to Wally World. Like that is what I see from a fan base. And it's not just a Penn State thing. Like, this is not me singling out Penn State's fan base, but it's always wanting more. And hey, in this era of college football, when the fans are the ones footing the bill for a lot of this, I get it. I understand it.
We have Motivational 153. He says, guys, I'm in school while watching this. Appreciate you tuning in, but I don't know that I can condone that, even though I've definitely watched TV in the back of a class in college before.
Well, at least you learned something today. So
I think.
Yeah.
I think we certainly have said a lot of words, guys. That is for sure. Last one here in the BWI Mailbag. If you got a question, drop it in the chat. We got a couple minutes left on the show. Navy Blue, I think he's talking to me specifically, says, you alluded, or maybe even stronger, for fans to temper their expectations about Nolan Rucci after seeing him in the blue-white scrimmage. Do you feel his performance was less promising than his extended run in the Badgers bowl game against LSU? Any possibility this was due to the move from the left to right side, or more due to general deficiency? I'm always hesitant to put too fine a point on these things, Navy Blue, which is why I think I generally was like, I just, from a movement perspective, this is a guy who was super big, super flexible, and had this all-American potential from a physical standpoint. Watching him in the blue-white game, I thought there was a little bit more stiffness than I expected, a little bit more hunched over, lurching at guys, than somebody who's super fluid and moving freely. Maybe it's because he moved to the right side. Maybe it's because that's what he is. And he is not the guy that I expected watching him in high school and then from the limited sample sizes we've gotten since then. This is the whole point about the projection and development and things you can't know when a guy is 17, 18 years old is what is he going to be when he's fully finished. And so I guess there was just a little more upper body stiffness, like, and it's a couple of plays. Like, I'm not talking about, I saw an extended amount of, oh, wow, that's alarming. It was a couple of plays where Colin Dinkins beats him on a blitz. And because he's leaning over, he's kind of hunched, he's tight in he's not moving the way I expected. And that's the bottom line. I had the same feeling about Chop Robinson before the 2022 season after I watched him go through some drills with John Scott Jr., and he was doing them completely wrong. And he was doing them to the point that he had to stop the drill and go back twice. And then he's just overwhelmingly physically talented. So, like, you can get a snapshot and it's not indicative of the full story. So that's the caveat there.
That explains why Chop didn't make it to the Bills. So
I cursed it from the very beginning. Fitz, do you have any thoughts on just that topic in general? Because I know you and I have talked briefly about it, but I want to get your thoughts here.
Be careful taking bowl game performances because it comes with multiple asterisks. I don't know why I would try and say that word live. But the good thing here with Rucci, and you saw it when he got here, is that there's still development to be tapped. And that was on the physical aspect of it. He had to get a lot in terms of learning the playbook, in terms of learning what to do, how Penn State offensive linemen play compared to Wisconsin offensive linemen. As we've talked, Wisconsin offensive linemen have really changed over the last 3-4 years, something like that. So there's still development there, and that's the promising thing. Having said that, some of that is physical, some of that is balance, some of that is stuff that's naturally inherent, and I think that's the worry stuff. So I think he still can make strides. And when we talk about rating guys and we talk about projecting guys in the long term, we want to see the top of their ceiling, essentially the roof of what they can be. So there's still a bit of that, but you have to understand what's in front of you right now. And that's an offensive lineman that's still competing for a starting job rather than a guy that's, going to be you're going to look at and say he's going to start for the next couple of years.
Yeah. This one here from Eggman in the chat. This is the last one I think that we have here. This one again for Fitz. Peter Gonzalez, is he truly a 4-star in 3 stars clothing, or his prior injuries continue to hamper more hopeful expectations? So where did you land in the end on Peter Gonzalez as a recruit? Because I know I firmly believe he's a guy with 4-star talent, but I understand if people don't want to project that on him after his high school career. There were some limitations there from what he did and what he was asked to do. So where did you land on him as a part of this class of 2024?
That was a 4-star on 3, so let's go with that. No, I mean, I think, and this is going to sound callous to some guys, but when those injuries happen matters. Like his injury happening a year before, say London Montgomery, his injury happened as a senior. That really, really throws off your development in terms of just strength, weight, all that kind of stuff. And that hurts. So him getting hurt, if there's a silver lining to him getting hurt earlier in his career, kind of helps him bounce back and do those things. And, he came out his senior year, had a terrific senior year. I think we look at him and we're kind of surprised by the athleticism. There's a guy that ran the 4.4s. There's a guy that broad jumped extremely well. Like the physical tools are there. Then you go out and you see the film, and he's not, as you mentioned, he's not asked to do really much of anything at Central Catholic. Like I watched Lyric Samuel today, and Lyric Samuel caught 27 passes last year and run heavy offense. And I think he was asked to do maybe a little bit more than Gonzalez was at Central Catholic. And that's kind of crazy when you think about, especially with the numbers that Gonzalez put up. So I think that potential is there, but I think that's where the hesitancy comes in, is how much more growing does he have to do from a route tree perspective? How much more growing does he have to do from a stiffness, lateral agility sort of a perspective? And how can he do that? So I certainly think he's got the potential to do so. It's just that there are several questions that come along with it.
There's a massive gap in our data and understanding of him with that lateral separation because of the compounding factors of several, like the knee injury and the timeline, as you mentioned, of when it happened. And then, like, it reminded me of the Clemson offense from like 2009, where it's just screen, stops, and go balls. He's running like 3 routes, and it's not his fault. It's just the reality of what they asked him to do at Central Catholic last year.
Just 2009, because it looked like that last year sometime.
I haven't checked in a while. Like that was mostly some really pent up resentment about Sammy Watkins. That's all that was.
The thing that I'll say for Gonzalez is that he competed to get that offer. He competed for his spot in his class, and he passed that test. And I think there's something to be said for that. He came to camp when he didn't have to go to. He could have gone to Virginia Tech and committed on the spot, and they would have been pretty pleased with that. But he came to Penn State. He earned that offer again. Beyond earning the check mark in your name, he earned that offer, he earned that spot, and he really put that work in. And then he continued to excel. And I think that there's something to be said for the work ethic to get yourself across that line. I think we've seen, I don't have data on it, but I think we've seen guys that have been in that situation that have really succeeded, as opposed to the guys that pick up those offers early and I don't want to say rest on their laurels, but like don't put that kind of work in.
2 questions here to end the show. One of them I'm just going to read because I think that there's some value in asking this question. But do you guys remember when you were kids, and I don't know if you did this, but did you ever try to ninja a thought into existence by asking the question repeatedly? Like, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if we did this? And like, it's always like going to a theme park or, getting a new Pokemon video game or something like that. And that is Quentin Martin playing wide receiver amongst the Penn State fan base. They say, with a mass exodus of receivers, says Jay Ben, what would we need to have Quentin Martin play hybrid wide receiver role? Is this is our daily bingo card. That's why I'm bringing it up. Somebody bringing up Quentin Martin playing wide receiver, but there's value and there's validity in Andy Kolnicki talking about getting playmakers the football. It's not born of nothing, but this is the question that I think we should answer here briefly to end the show because I don't want to take up too much of you guys' overtime. He says, it's fair to say that Coach K he's better suited to develop. Whole is better than the sum of parts in the wide receiver room. He's never had a collection of elite players, yet got elite results. Nate, how much are you thinking that's a possibility in this for this offense next year?
Yeah, I think it's possible for sure. Look, he's been very well received publicly, privately, you name it. I think that he's a guy who has demonstrated that quality of being able to, figure it out. And I think importantly, not just figure it out, but have the players be with him in that endeavor, right? It has been a cohesiveness, a communal thing that he brings to the football teams that he has coached. And I think that it is fair to say that is something that was lacking previously, right? So that whole conversation James Franklin had kind of at the beginning of spring practice about the why, right? And it's like, okay, he is not just putting, it's not Madden, right? They're not just computer figures who are replaceable, right? And are assigned to do something that you draw up on a sheet. It's not that. It's not that. There is purpose. There are roles. There are things that have to be embraced by literally every single player that you have on that side of the ball. And I think that the hope, I should say, is that he is able to deliver that to Penn State this season.
Fitz, final thoughts here on the show.
We're in the hope portion of that cycle where you hire a new coordinator and you think that he can work the magic. But I agree with Nate in that the feedback internally of just knowing the concepts better, knowing where guys can be, not necessarily where they should be, but Drew rolls out. The receiver knows what to do in terms of finding the right spot. And Drew knows where the right spot is. All that kind of stuff will make the offense better because it's not about your base offense and what you line up. And, maybe 7 out of 12 games every year is about that because you're just so much overwhelmingly better than the opposition. But when it breaks down, what's going to happen? And if it breaks down at quarterback, if it breaks down at receiver, the coverage break or the protection breaks down, how do you respond to that? And how can you maximize those plays? And I think that's what he did well at Kansas, is having those guys in the right spot. And it might look awkward at times, but at the same time, moving those changes is more important than pretty much anything else except for scoring points. So I think how you can improvise and being able to have the capacity to improvise at every position is, I think that's what you can get out of the why, like the learn, like not throwing too much at you, but throwing a bunch at you from this chapter. Like, you've got different chapters to cover in that playbook, and how much you can sort of soak in all that and how you can put that into process. I think that's the difference here, is not just playing Madden and seeing that the guy's going to run the 12-yard out route and putting it on the 12-yard out route. It's what you can do with that when you freewheel, because we've seen the best college football offenses are the fun ones to watch, and they're fun for a reason. That's because they're making things happen.
And I think that answers this question here from RD24. He says, how do you think Penn State's run game will hold up this year? Do you expect them to be more explosive and consistent? And that, what you guys just described, is why, I personally think so. I think they have, as you guys said, it's the hope season. Potential is there for all of those things. And we'll see all of this together. I don't think we're going to have any idea until we know what they're rolling out on the football field in September. We're going to talk about all of that all the way up until and through that time. So stay with us. Subscribe here to Blue White Illustrated on YouTube. Thanks again to Nate Bauer and Sean Fitz, our experts here discussing Penn State football topics on the BWI Live Show. Thanks to Curtis Jacobs. By the way, if I seemed a little distracted, I was getting in contact with Curtis. We're going to try and get him on the show this week. So we're going to have a bunch of great stuff here for you to learn, consume, and converse about on BWI Live. We will be back tomorrow.